The night I bought a one-way plane ticket out of Alabama, I was sitting in a Waffle House parking lot in my truck with a half-eaten waffle on the passenger seat and 43 unread text messages from my wife's family lighting up my phone. None of them were asking if I was okay. Every single one was some version of the same sentence. You need to come back and apologize. My sister-in-law Candace sent 5 messages in a row, each one slightly more threatening than the last. My brother-in-law Derek just sent a voice memo I didn't open. And Raina, my wife of 9 years, the woman who told me on our wedding day that it would always be us against the world, had sent exactly 2 words. Apologize. Now. Not are you safe? Not I love you but. Just those 2 words, like a command. Like I was a dog who'd chewed up a couch cushion and needed to be corrected before anyone could move on with their evening. I set the phone face down on the seat, picked up the waffle, and thought about something my grandfather used to say when I was growing up in Opelika. He'd say, "Stuart, the moment you apologize for being yourself is the moment you start disappearing." I didn't fully understand what he meant when I was 9 years old. I understood it completely now. I opened the Delta app on my phone, typed in Birmingham to Denver, and booked the first available flight for 6 the next morning. One way. And that was the beginning of the end of the life I'd been quietly tolerating for 3 years. And the beginning of the one I actually deserved. Before I tell you the rest of this, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Drop a like on this video and leave a comment below, because I read every single one of them. Tell me if you've ever been in a situation where you were expected to apologize just to keep the peace, even when you knew you'd done nothing wrong. You might be surprised how many people are living that exact life right now. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Stuart Mallory. I'm 44 years old, and I run an online accounting firm from my home in Harpersville, Alabama, a small town about 45 minutes southeast of Birmingham, the kind of place where people still wave from their front porches, and everyone knows which truck belongs to which family. My firm handles tax planning, bookkeeping, and financial consulting for small business owners scattered across 12 states. I have 22 clients who pay me monthly retainers, a few dozen who come to me seasonally, and in a good year, I clear well into 6 figures doing work that I genuinely love, in a home office that overlooks about 3 acres of pine trees that my wife and I planted in our first year of marriage. From the outside, my life probably looked ordinary. A quiet guy in a small Alabama town, working from home, driving a truck that was 2 years old but not flashy, wearing Carhartt shirts to the grocery store. That was the version of me that Raina's family had decided was the truth of me, and they had decided it years ago, and no amount of evidence to the contrary was going to change their minds. Raina grew up in Huntsville. Her family, the Pressfields, are what I'd describe as loud, opinionated, close-knit, in the way that doesn't always mean healthy, and absolutely convinced that they are the final authority on any subject that matters. Her mother, Donna, was a retired school principal who treated every conversation like a parent-teacher conference she'd already decided the outcome of. Her father, Gene, was a commercial contractor who had built exactly 2 things in his life: a decent business and a deep, unshakable belief that any man who worked indoors wasn't working at all. Raina had 2 brothers, Derek, who I've already mentioned, and a younger one named Cooper, who at 31 had never held a job for more than 8 months, but had plenty of opinions about financial responsibility. And then there was Candace, Derek's wife, who had appointed herself the social director of the entire Pressfield operation and treated family gatherings like military operations she was commanding from a clipboard. I want you to understand something about my relationship with these people before I tell you what happened at the reunion. I had never, not once in 9 years, been welcomed into this family in any real sense. I was tolerated. I was present. I showed up. I sat down. I ate the food. I smiled at the right moments. But there was always something just beneath the surface of every interaction, a slight edge in Gene's voice when he asked about my work, a way that Donna would pause a half-second too long before answering a question I asked, as if she was calculating whether my question was worth engaging with. The running joke, and I call it a joke because they called it a joke, was that Stuart didn't really work. "Oh, Stuart works from home," Donna would say, in that tone that meant the opposite of what the words actually said. Gene would nod and say something about how it must be nice, and Derek would laugh in that way that men laugh when they want to pile on without technically saying anything they can be held accountable for. And Raina would smile and change the subject. For years, I let it go. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself they just didn't understand what I did, and that was fine. I made good money. My clients trusted me. My business had grown every year for 6 consecutive years. I didn't need the press fields to validate that. But there is a long distance between needing validation and deserving basic respect. And I had spent 9 years confusing the two. The annual Pressfield family reunion happened every summer, rotating between different family members' properties. This particular year, it was being held at Gene and Donna's lake house on Logan Martin Lake, about an hour from Harpersville. It was a Saturday in July, which meant it was 92 degrees by noon, and everyone was either in the water or stationed near the coolers, or, in Gene's case, holding court on the back deck like a man auditioning to become his own memorial. Raina and I drove up together. She was excited in the way she always got around her family. Looser, louder, laughing at things she wouldn't have laughed at on an ordinary day. I always noticed this about her, how she became someone slightly different when we pulled into her parents' driveway. I used to find it endearing. By this point, I mostly found it exhausting. The first hour was fine. I helped carry food from the vehicles. I said hello to the relatives I hadn't seen since last summer. I answered the same questions about my work that I always answered, using the simple version because the full version would require a whiteboard in 45 minutes. Gene grilled. Donna organized. Candace circulated with a camera, photographing everything. Cooper showed up an hour late and immediately started telling a story that required everyone's complete attention. And then Gene said it. We were all gathered near the back deck, that overlap of maybe 25 people between the yard and the water, and somebody had asked Gene about the expansion he was doing on his business. He'd been talking about adding a residential division for months, which was a significant financial undertaking, and I had actually done some research on it in my free time because I'd been quietly hoping to offer him some guidance, not because I expected anything in return, just because it was what I did. Gene was explaining some of the logistics, and I said, calmly, conversationally, genuinely, that based on what he'd described, there might be some tax structure implications worth considering before he signed any contracts with subcontractors. That the way he'd set up the division might expose him to a liability he wasn't accounting for. Gene looked at me the way you look at a child who has just offered you advice about how to drive. Stuart, he said, and he said my name like it was a polite cough. I've been running a contracting business for 30 years. I think I understand how a business works. I nodded. I said, of course, I just meant from a tax perspective. And Gene said, I've got a CPA for that. And Derek, who was standing 3 feet away holding a beer, said, yeah, last thing we need is advice from a guy who does everybody's taxes on his laptop. And he laughed. And Cooper laughed. And 2 cousins I barely knew laughed. And Donna smiled at something across the yard. And Candace took a photo. And Raina said nothing. I want you to sit with that for a second. Raina said nothing. I didn't explode. I didn't make a scene. I said, fair enough. And I picked up my drink and walked down to the edge of the water, and I stood there for about 10 minutes, looking at Logan Martin Lake, thinking about how much I had swallowed. Over the years, how many small moments exactly like that one I had absorbed and dismissed and carried quietly home. And I thought I'd done the right thing by walking away. I thought I'd been the bigger person. But sometimes walking away from a small fire just lets it grow. It got worse about 2 hours later. Candace had organized a group activity, some kind of trivia game she'd printed out on matching sheets, which, I'll give her credit, was actually thoughtful. Families split into teams, and the questions ranged from pop culture to general knowledge to a Pressfield-specific round about family history. People were laughing, getting competitive in the harmless way people do at these things. Then came the money round. One of the trivia questions was about investing, something about what type of account offers the best long-term tax advantages for self-employed individuals. I knew the answer immediately. It's a SEPIRA or a solo 401k depending on contribution limits, and I said so. Clearly. Correctly. Cooper said, that doesn't sound right. And I said patiently that I was actually a financial professional, and I was fairly confident. And Cooper said, and I am telling you this exactly as it happened. Being self-employed doesn't make you a financial professional, Stuart. Anybody can say they own a business. The deck went quiet for just a moment. One of those moments where everyone is looking at their shoes or their drinks or their phones because they know something just crossed a line, but nobody wants to be the one to say it. I looked at Raina. She was looking at the trivia sheet. I took a breath and I said, Cooper, I have a CPA license, an enrolled agent designation, and I've been managing multi-state tax strategy for business clients for 11 years. I think I know what a SEPIRA is. And Cooper shrugged. All right, man, don't get defensive. That word, defensive. It is one of the most effective words that people use to shut down someone who is simply standing up for themselves. The moment you're labeled defensive, anything you say in your own defense becomes evidence of the label. It's a trap, and Cooper knew exactly what he was doing. I stood up from the table. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call anyone a name. I simply said calmly that I was going to take a walk, and I walked off the deck and down to the far end of the dock, and I sat down and I looked at the water and I thought very seriously about what kind of man I wanted to be for the rest of my life. Raina found me about 20 minutes later. I genuinely thought, she was coming to say she saw what happened, to tell me she should have spoken up, to squeeze my hand and remind me that she was on my side. Instead, she sat down beside me and said, "You embarrassed me out there." I looked at her. I said, "I embarrassed you." She said, "You made a big deal out of a trivia game." I said, "Raina, your brother told me in front of 25 people that I don't count as a professional. Your father dismissed everything I said this afternoon. Derek's been making comments all day, and you have not said one word." She said, "They're my family, Stuart." I said, "And I'm your husband." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said the sentence that I will remember for the rest of my life. "You have two options. You can go back up there and apologize for making things awkward, or you can leave. But I am not going home over this." I stared at her. I looked at this woman I had been married to for 9 years, this woman I had built a life with, planted pine trees with, bought furniture with, built a business alongside, and I realized something that I had been refusing to see for a long time. Raina had made her choice. She had made it years ago, and it wasn't me. I said, "Okay." And I stood up. And I walked to the parking area, got in my truck, and I drove to the Waffle House in Cropwell because I needed a place to sit that wasn't inside that situation. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours. I ate the waffle. I watched the text messages come in. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about my clients, who trusted me enough to hand me their financial lives. I thought about the version of me who would walk back up that dock, sit down, apologize for the sin of knowing what I was talking about, and spend the rest of the summer smiling like it never happened. I thought about what that man looked like in 10 years, in 20. I opened the Delta app. Birmingham to Denver, one way, 6 the next morning. Gate B7, $312. I hit confirm before I could change my mind. Then I drove home. I packed one bag, not even a full bag. Just what I needed for a week, which was all I thought I'd need to make my point. I texted my assistant to reschedule 2 morning calls. I set my laptop bag by the front door. I set my alarm for 4:15, and then I lay down on my side of the bed in the house that was quiet because my wife wasn't in it, and I slept better than I had in months. I did not tell Raina I was leaving. I did not call. I did not text. I did not leave a note. At 5 the next morning, I drove to Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport, parked my truck in long-term parking, went through security, bought a black coffee, and boarded a flight to Denver, Colorado. I had a college friend there, a man named Tyler Braxton, who I had known since we were both 19-year-old accounting students at Auburn University. Tyler had moved to Denver 12 years ago, built a life there, and had been inviting me to visit for longer than I could remember. I texted him from the gate. "Might be coming your way. Can I crash for a bit?" His response came in 40 seconds. "The guest room has been ready since 2019. Get here." I landed at Denver International at 9:15 in the morning Mountain Time. By 10, Tyler was picking me up at arrivals in a blue truck that was older than my guilt. By noon, we were sitting on his back deck in Jefferson County with coffee and a view of the foothills that looked like something a person would put on a wall to remind themselves that the world is bigger than whatever problem they're carrying. Tyler didn't ask a lot of questions. He let me sit. He made lunch. He talked about his own life. His daughter's soccer tournament that weekend. The project his company had been working on. The elk he'd spotted at the tree line 2 mornings ago. He gave me space to be a human being without an agenda. It was the most normal I had felt in longer than I could specifically remember. Back in Alabama, the Pressfield family reunion continued without me for about 4 hours before anyone apparently thought to wonder where I was in any serious way. Raina called at 2 in the afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 3:30. Voicemail. At 4:15 she texted, "Stuart, where are you? Come back and let's talk." At 5:40. "Okay, I'm getting worried. Please answer." At 6:53, after she'd presumably driven back to Harpersville and discovered my truck was not in the driveway. "Stuart, your truck is not here. Where are you? Please call me." I read all of these messages. I did not respond to any of them. At 7:20, she called Tyler. I don't know how she got his number. Probably found it in some old email chain. But Tyler knocked on the guest room door where I was reading and said, "Your wife called my cell." And I said, "What did you tell her?" And he said, "I told her you were here and you were safe and that you needed some space." I nodded. He said, "Do you want me to tell her anything else?" I thought about it. I said, "No. That's enough for now." The messages that came after that were different. They were no longer just from Raina. Donna texted me to tell me I was being childish. Jean sent a message that said, and I am not paraphrasing, "Real men don't run from their problems." Derek called twice, which was somehow the part that surprised me most because Derek had never shown any particular interest in my location before this moment. Cooper sent a long message about how I was overreacting and that nobody had meant anything by what was said, and that the family was just like that, as if just like that was a complete explanation and not a confession. And Candace sent me a voice message. I eventually listened to it. She said that what I'd done was incredibly selfish, that Raina was crying, that the whole family was worried, and that I needed to remember that marriage meant putting your ego aside sometimes for the people you loved. I listened to that voice message twice. Then I went out to Tyler's deck and watched the sun drop behind the mountains, and I thought about ego. About whose ego had actually been the problem in that situation. I stayed in Denver for 11 days. During those 11 days, I worked my normal hours from Tyler's guest room because my clients don't stop needing things because my marriage is falling apart. I took calls. I filed returns. I answered questions. I did the work that Jean Pressfield had spent 9 years deciding wasn't real work, and I did it well. And 2 of my clients sent me the kind of emails that remind you why you do what you do. I also did something I had been putting off for a long time. I called a therapist. I want to tell you that clearly, because I think there is still a version of this kind of story where the person drives away and figures everything out through sheer stubbornness, and that version of the story isn't honest. What I had carried out of that reunion wasn't just anger at Cooper, or Jean, or Derek, or Candace. It was something older. It was the accumulated weight of years of swallowing things I shouldn't have swallowed, of telling myself that peace was more important than being seen clearly, of watching my wife choose her family's comfort over my dignity again and again, and calling it love because the alternative was too painful to name. The therapist's name was Dr. Alicia Fontaine. She was based in Denver, and Tyler had actually recommended her, which tells you something about Tyler. Our first session was 60 minutes. I talked. She listened. At the end, she said something that stayed with me. She said, "When we accept disrespect repeatedly in order to maintain a relationship, we don't actually maintain the relationship. We just maintain the appearance of one." I went back to my room that night, and I sat with that for a long time. Raina flew to Denver on day 8. She didn't ask if she could come. She texted me the flight information the night before and said she needed to see me. I didn't tell her not to come. Tyler picked her up from the airport because I asked him to, and the 3 of us sat in his kitchen for the first 20 minutes making the kind of small talk that nobody wants to make but everyone does because sitting down directly in the truth is terrifying. Then Tyler said he had somewhere to be, which he didn't, and he left us alone. Raina looked tired in the particular way that people look tired when they haven't been sleeping well, and also haven't been willing to admit why. She'd lost some of the looseness she always had around her family. Here, in someone else's kitchen in Colorado, she was just herself. A woman sitting across from her husband who had packed a bag and bought a one-way ticket instead of apologizing. She said, "Why didn't you just apologize?" And I said, "Raina, what was I supposed to be apologizing for?" She was quiet. I said, "I knew the answer to a trivia question correctly. Your brother told me that didn't make me a professional. Your father dismissed me at the grill in front of 25 people. And when I asked you to be on my side, you told me I had 2 options, apologize or leave. So I left. And I'm asking you, what specifically should I have apologized for?" She said, "You could have just let it go." I said, "I have been letting it go for 9 years. Do you understand that? 9 years of letting it go. And every time I let it go, It told everyone in that family. It told you that it was acceptable, and now it's so normal that you can't even see it anymore. She started to cry. Not the theatrical kind, the real kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't want to be seen. She said, "I didn't know it was that bad." And I said, "Raina, you were there for all of it." That sentence landed harder than I intended it to. But it was true, and I was done softening true things. We talked for 4 hours that day. We talked the next morning over coffee. We talked on a walk around Tyler's neighborhood, through streets that had nothing to do with our life, which somehow made it easier to be honest. What came out of those conversations was not a miracle reconciliation. It was not a dramatic reversal where Raina suddenly saw everything clearly and promised to change everything. Real life doesn't work like that, and any story that tells you it does is leaving something out. What came out was something smaller and more important. Raina said, "I think I've been choosing them instead of you for a long time without letting myself know that's what I was doing." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't know how to fix it." I said, "I don't either. But I know that apologizing to your family so they'd feel comfortable again was not a step toward fixing it. It was a step away. And I wasn't willing to take it." She said, "I know. That's why I'm here." Here is what happened afterward, because I know you're wondering. I came home to Alabama 10 days after I left, not because I'd received an apology from the Pressfields. I had not. Jean sent me a text that was as close to an acknowledgement as I think Jean Pressfield is capable of producing, which said, "Hope you're doing all right. Things got heated. Shake and move on." I did not respond to that text. Donna called Raina and apparently had a longer conversation that Raina summarized for me by saying, "She thinks you overreacted, but she's willing to move forward." I told Raina that moving forward was fine, but that I was no longer willing to attend events where I was going to be dismissed and condescended to with no consequence. Raina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." That "okay" was the first real thing I'd heard from her in a long time. Derek and Cooper have not contacted me directly. Cooper sent a single text 3 weeks after the reunion that said, "No hard feelings, man," which I interpreted as his version of an apology and responded to with a simple, "Thanks." We have not spoken since. Candace, remarkably, was the one who surprised me. She called me 6 weeks after the reunion, and when I answered, mostly out of shock, she said, "I've been thinking about what I said to you in that voice message, and I want to tell you that I was out of line. I don't fully understand what happened between you and the family, but I reacted without knowing the full picture, and that wasn't fair." I told her I appreciated that, and I meant it. Candace is not my favorite person in the world, but she had the character to make that call, and I will not forget it. Raina and I are still married. I want to be honest about what that means and what it doesn't mean. We are in couples counseling every other Thursday with a woman named Dr. Patricia Voss in Birmingham. It is hard. It is slow. There are sessions where we leave feeling further apart than when we walked in, and there are sessions where something opens up between us that I hadn't expected. What I know is that the man who drove to that Waffle House parking lot in Cropwell, Alabama, and booked a one-way ticket to Denver instead of walking back up that dock and bending the knee, that man is the one Raina is married to now. Not the one who swallowed things. The real one. My grandfather was right. The moment you apologize for being yourself is the moment you start disappearing. I had been disappearing for 9 years. I stopped. I still work from my home office in Harpersville. I still look out at those pine trees. My firm added 3 new clients in the 6 months since the reunion. I've been contributing to a video series about small business tax strategy that has apparently been circulating in some accounting circles, which is the kind of thing that makes Jean Pressfield's comment about my laptop feel a little bit distant. I don't need Jean to understand what I do. I don't need Derek's respect or Cooper's acknowledgement or Donna's approval. What I needed, what I had been quietly starving for, was for my wife to see me clearly and choose me anyway. Not because her family said it was okay, not because I'd performed the required apology and smoothed everything over, but because I was worth choosing. We're not there yet, but we're closer than we've ever been. And it started the moment I stopped apologizing for existing and started letting people feel the weight of what they stood to lose. Some people only understand what they have when the truck is gone from the driveway, when the calls go to voicemail, when the one-way ticket is already purchased and the gate is already boarding. I gave the Pressfields 9 years of swallowing things quietly. What I gave myself, on that flight to Denver, was the first honest moment I'd had in a marriage I still wasn't sure I could save. That felt like a start, and sometimes a start is everything. This story hits deep because it's about the moment a man stops being a doormat and starts being a man. For 9 years, Stuart traded his self-respect for peace. He let his in-laws treat his career like a joke and his presence like an inconvenience. But peace that costs you your dignity isn't peace. It's a slow death. When his wife Raina told him to apologize or leave, she wasn't just defending her family. She was showing Stuart that he was at the bottom of her priority list. So, Stuart did the only thing a man of character could do. He disappeared. He didn't just book a flight to Denver. He booked a flight back to his own life. He proved that if you aren't willing to stand up for yourself, no one else will. My favorite line in this whole story? The moment you apologize for being yourself is the moment you start disappearing. Stuart stopped disappearing that night. He left as a victim and came back as a partner who demands respect. And honestly, that's the only way a marriage survives.